Okay, welcome everybody to this next video. This video will mainly be showing you the basics of working with assemblies. Now, what is an assembly? An assembly is basically, an assembly of different parts. So this is the engine you'll be creating during the few upcoming lessons. And if you would add a section view, you can see that it has a piston inside of it. And this piston is one single part. And that's one component of the entire assembly. So an assembly is pretty much an assembly of parts in a certain order. Now we are able to move parts in an assembly. So if I go to move and I select this part, I can actually rotate the engine. And I can also rotate components using the rotate option as well. Now let's go back to 3D view. So we're going to show you how to assemble the basic parts of the engine. So let me open another assembly. This assembly only contains a static part of the engine. So these are the parts that actually won't move and will stay static. When you create a new assembly, it's very important to pick your first main part. From your main part, you'll attach all your other components. So if you have a moving engine, then for instance your crankshaft cannot be your first primary part, because that would mean that all the other remaining bits of the engine should move around the crankshaft, which is normally not the case. So in this case our static engine assembly, which won't move, has our main part, and our crankshaft moves within our static part. So let's close this down and open a new assembly and see what the steps are which we need to take. So let's minimize this. Let's go to File, let's go to New. We can select Assembly instead of Part and click OK. Okay, now on the left side we have the beginning of the assembly. As you can see in the top here, it also says Begin Assembly. And here we can pretty much select components, and we can either select parts or assemblies. We can add an assembly to an assembly, or we can add parts together to create an assembly. We always have those two options. So you'll see on the PDF sheet that you'll get with the engine assembly, you should always contain the static and the dynamic parts separately, and then add them together in a later state. So as you can see here, we have two assemblies. You can see the assembly sign. So if I then select a part and move my mouse to the assembly space, you can see the actual assembly is connected to my mouse. And I can also go to Browse here, and I can select a part. So I'm going to select the cylinder, and then I have a part attached to my mouse. As you can see, the icon here changes from cylinder to static. Let's browse for another part. This is the engine feet. So this is the actual, let's deselect the parts here and only select this part. So this is the actual engine base, I should say. This is here displayed in Dutch, but this is the engine base component. And we're going to start with this component because it's the base of the engine and because it's static. It won't move. So the main part should always be fixed and is not allowed to move. So the other parts, so the rest of the engine, should be allowed to move. So this is again one reason why you cannot pick, for instance, the crankshaft or piston to be your main component, because this component should be allowed to move in your engine. So we can do two things. As you can see, it's attached to my mouse now, and I can place it anywhere in the assembly space. As you can also see, my engine base has an origin, and you can also see there's an origin in the center of the screen. This is the assembly origin. Now, same as is for parts, same as goes for assemblies. The distance from the origin of your main component to your assembly origin should be known. So same as fully defined sketching, as you draw a line, then the distance from that line and the origin needs to be known. The same is valid here. So I can place it somewhere here, but then the distance is unknown. So if I mouse it over the assembly, or sorry, if I mouse the origin of my component over the assembly origin, as you can see, it snaps together. I can click and it's held into place. Now if you go to the left, you'll see your first component here. You can also see the little F in front of it. Your first assembly component, that's your main component, will always get fixed by default in SolidWorks. So if I were to place this component somewhere else, and not on the origin, it will get fixed there. So if I want to undo this, I can always right click on the component, click on float, and once I've done that, I can go to move component here in the top, simply select the component and drag it around. Now let's say I clicked here instead of on the origin when putting the part in the assembly. So let's leave it here, right click again, and this time select fix. So this will switch between float and fix. Now as you can see, it's fixed in this position. If I try to move it, it's not possible. I get a message to select the component is fixed. But the distance from this origin to the assembly origin is unknown, which also means I cannot use the main planes of the assembly in my assembly 2. So this is an issue. So to fix this, I can right click, click on float again, open the part. I can click on the origin of my part, hold down Ctrl, click on the origin of my assembly. As you can see, that lights up. I can go to mate. Then as you can see, it mates the two origins together. I can click on OK. Now, this mate function is used to attach multiple parts together. So we don't add dimensions. Well, we could. We could add dimension mates. But we use mates to attach components together. So let's shut this down. As you can see now, they are mated together. So if I click open mates, I get a coincident mate. Because I've mated them together and I've mated the origin to the origin of a main assembly, as shown also by these blue arrows, which should appear in version 2015 of SolidWorks, I don't need the fixed relation anymore. So I can still add right click and select fixed. And as you can see, this mate gets suppressed and it's still fixed in exactly the same position. This is fine as well. There's nothing wrong with either choosing a fixture for your main part or choosing a mate like this coincident one. You could choose either one. Just make sure that the origin of your main part is equal to the origin of your assembly. Well, there are some other ways to do this using symmetry, which I'll show later on in a separate video. But for now, always make sure the origins are stacked together and that they are coincident. So let's remove the fixture again, make it float. As you can see, this lights up. We're back to where we started. Now we can always use the planes of our assembly. We can also use the planes of our main part if you click open a part right here. So we always have those options. Now let's add some mates. Let's again go to Insert Components, go to Browse, and let's see, we'll open the larger icons to get some pictures. Well, that won't load yet, so let's go to Details. And let's see, what should we add? Let's add the Carter part. So this is actually the main engine part which houses the crankshaft. Now let's add this together. So as you can see, the second part I can just add in my assembly space and just click somewhere in the middle of the space, because the second part I add won't get fixed automatically. If I just click on the first part, so my main assembly part, and click on somewhere in the space, it gets fixed in that position. But my second part won't do that. So if I click Insert Component again and just add some random part and just click here, you can see it has a minus sign. And if it has a minus sign, if I go to move, I can move it around. So only my first part will get fixed. That's why it's so important that it is coincident with the origin of the assembly. Now if I want to delete something, let's delete this, right click, delete, yes, and it's gone. So now let's add some mates to make sure this part gets attached to this part. Now, since we in SolidWorks we work in 3D, which also means we usually need 3 mates across 3 axes in order to attach the components together. So if I go to mate, let's try that again, go to mate, I can for instance select this cylinder and I can select this hole here. So I click OK, it has added a mate. Now if I move this component, I'm only allowed to move it up and down, and I cannot move it left to right because the 2 cylinders are in line with each other. Now of course I can still move it up and down, which is not what I want. So I want to add another mate, so I'm going to go to mate again, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to attach this face to that face. and the parts are joined together with a coincident. As you can see, I also have the parallel option, the perpendicular, tangent, concentric. I can add distance, I can add an angle. So I have multiple mate options, and most of these should be familiar to you. I also have some advanced mate here, discussing symmetry, and we have some mechanical mates here for some more advanced parts. So I can use mates to attach parts together. Now let's click on OK. As you can see, I can now still move the component. It still has a minus sign in front of it, so if I go to move, I can still move the part. So I don't want my engine to rotate in this way. So I need to add another mate. But that's difficult in this case because there's no real mate or face I can select in order to make sure that I cannot rotate anymore. So what I would normally do is select two flat faces and say those two faces should be parallel to each other. But this part has no flat faces on the side and only has circular faces. It has flat faces here, but adding a parallel relation there won't help me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the parts. Let's move this around a little bit. And I'm going to use the planes. So I can select the front plane here, and I can select this front plane. If I made them together to be parallel, then the top part is not able to rotate anymore. So I'm going to go to Mate. As you can see, SolidWorks automatically selects the coincident. I could also select the parallel, that works as well. There's no real difference. I only don't want these plates to rotate anymore. So if I click OK again to shut it down, then you can see that the minus sign in front of this part has been removed. And now if I try to rotate it, it's fixed. It says the component is fully defined. And why is that? The position of this part is known because the origins are coincident. And I've added 3 mates to make sure that this part is attached to that part and it cannot move anymore. So both parts are fully defined and I have no minus signs left on the left side. Now let's try the same, but now let's add another square part. So let's duplicate this part again to add some square part and see how that goes. So I'm just going to insert the same component again. And let's just attach these two parts together. And now we're just going to add flat faces. So we can click on this face and let's say it should be attached to this face. And as you can see, they are coincident. I can click on OK. Click on OK again to shut it off. Go to move. And I can then move the part, but it'll always remain, the two faces will always remain coincident. It looks a little bit weird because you're always viewing it in 2D. But if you move it around, you can see that the parts will always remain attached together via that face. Now if I add 2 other mates, so if I select this face and this face, click on OK, then they are mated together. And now if I move the component, it can only move front to back. And then if I add another mate, this face to that face, let's select coincident first. Sometimes it doesn't automatically snap properly. And you need to select it manually, then click OK to shut it off. And then I cannot mate the component anymore. If I click open mates, you can see I've added 3 mates, 3 faces, because we have a 3D component to make that part fully defined as well. Now if I want to delete a mate, just right click, delete, click on yes, and then you're able to move the component again. So using the mates here, you can add parts together. You can rotate parts and move parts using this rotate option. You know now how to insert a component or insert an assembly. You are familiar with some of the basic mates. You know how to mate planes now, because you can also click open the plus buttons here and use the planes for mating. That's possible as well. And you know now what an assembly is. So thank you again for watching and see you again in the next video.